On the 13th of March. I've been advised that there are no fire drills planned for this evening, but if the alarm does sound, Mr. Nash will assess the situation and provide further instructions on the evacuation of the building if necessary. I would remind you that this meeting will be broadcast live and recorded for playback on the Maidstone Borough Council website, but will anyone else be recording or filming the proceedings? I ask so that people at the meeting will know if this will be happening. And I don't see anybody indicating. Members, you have been advised that we've got two systems in operation tonight. You will see the camera there and the camera here for the new system. We are testing the new webcasting system, but we've got the other old one running alongside it. So it should be quite interesting, I think. Members who are using mobile phones or tablets are asked to please ensure that these are on silent and are only being used with regard to the business of the agenda this evening. And I'm apologising now because I can feel I've got a scratchy throat and will probably cough my way through this meeting. Right. Actually, do you want to explain on that more, Mike?
I can explain a little.
Please.
Excellent, thank you. So, yeah, you've explained the most of the webcasting, but yeah, just to summarise, we're testing a new system that uses YouTube to broadcast and archive webcasts. This is the first time that we're testing it at a committee meeting, so we're running both alongside one another. Essentially, the experience tonight for both everyone in the room and also those watching online shouldn't change, but this is purely the first live test of an alternative system.
Mr. Nash, do we have any notification of substitute members?
No apologies for absence have been received.
Hopefully we'll have some more people arriving then as we go forward. As far as I'm aware, there are no urgent items. I can't see any visiting members. Are there any disclosures by members and officers?
Just on item 15, because it's about group spokespersons on the planning committee, should I probably say that I am a group spokesperson on the planning committee? Is that relevant disclosure? Because it affects sort of what we can and can't do?
Yeah, it's worth noting, but I don't think you need to... Thank you for disclosing it, but I don't think we need to worry too much about it.
Councillor Blackmore, I'll give you time to settle, but have you got any disclosures at all?
No disclosures, Madam Chairman.
Thank you. Are there any disclosures of lobbying? None, thank you. To consider whether any items should be taken in private because of the possible disclosure of exempt information, as far as I'm aware, that we have none in that bracket. So if we turn to the minutes of the meeting held on the 30th of January, which are 1 to 5, but I believe we have an amendment.
Just agree to take it in public first. Is that okay?
Take what, the minutes first?
No, the exempt item. Just
Oh,
be
sorry.
agreement that it's taken in public.
Yes.
Yeah.
Sorry, I beg your pardon. So, before we go through the minutes, the Vice Chairman and myself picked up on some wording in here that was completely contradictory. So right at the outset, can I just get Mr. Nash to tell you where it is and what the proposed amendment is?
Yeah, thank you. So, yeah, it was brought to my attention that the first quote on page 4 of the agenda pack, it doesn't quite read as it should. It's a quote from a case study in the committee structure review report. With the permission of the committee, I would like to amend the minutes to include the full text of the case study so that it reads properly. This would mean that the minutes would read as the draft sports and playing pitch strategy was discussed at the Heritage, Culture and Leisure Committee, Strategic Planning, Sustainability and Transportation Committee and Policy and Resources Committee in 2018, as various aspects of the work fell within the remit of the different committees. This shows that there is the potential to streamline decision-making by designating a single point of decision-making, and that committee terms of reference could be enhanced to ensure that this is minimised in future.
right, members, it's bullet point number 1. It's the quote under it. And the reason the wording needs, if you read it as it is without the other bit wrapped around it, it's actually contradictory because it would appear to say that we'll make sure in future that we can minimise streamlining decisions. That's how it currently reads. So would you read that out again, please?
So ahead of that quote, it should read, so yeah, insert ahead of the quote, the draft sports and playing pitch strategy was discussed at the Heritage, Culture and Leisure Committee, Strategic Planning, Sustainability and Transportation Committee and Policy and Resources Committee in 2018, as various aspects of the work fell within the remit of the different committees, and then lead into the quote that's on page 4 of the agenda pack.
So members, if we go back to I'll take them page by page now then. For accuracy, page 1, page 2, page 3, and page 4 with that amendment, if that is approved, and page 5. Members, are you happy that I sign the minutes with that amendment? Yes? Right, thank you very much. As far as I'm aware, there are no petitions. Yes, I know I've got to ask her. And there are no questions and answer session for members of the public either, as far as I'm aware. Councillor Fissenden, do you have any disclosures or disclosures of lobbying?
No, Madam Chair. Apologies for my lateness.
I don't think this is the last meeting of the year, so we haven't got a committee work programme.
There's no items.
No items for a committee work programme as such. No reports from outside bodies as far as I'm aware, and so we go immediately to the item 13, which you'll find on page 6, reference from council, the motion for yearly elections, and I'm going to call on Councillor Perry to introduce this, as this was one that was raised by him at full council. Councillor Perry.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. Yes, I will be brief because I think the paper pretty well says it all, and I don't want to go into the rights and wrongs of for yearly or not elections at this stage. This is what I would like to say is that the objective is to ask officers to review this, to look at the whole issue, and particularly the analysis of cost savings as well, if there are any, and to report back to the Democracy Committee, or, and I've emphasised here, whatever is in its place, because clearly we are going to be reviewing all the reports and the committees at this meeting. So I'd just like to say I raised this at the council, and this paper really just sets out what was raised at the council and what I was requesting. Thank you.
Officers, do any of you wish to come in at this point with any points? No? All right. Is therefore open for discussion. Yes, Councillor Goot.
Thank you, Chairman. I'm more than happy to support the motion. Thank you, Councillor Perry. However, that would be subject to an amendment, if I may. The reference, which would follow the practice of Kent County Council, that was the phrase that puzzled me a little, because it is a completely different kind of authority, naturally, strategic authority, and if anything, we would be falling in line with other borough or district councils. So I'm wondering whether we need to have any such phrase at all, so that we go from 4 yearly elections, this would include an analysis, da-da-da-da-da.
Councillor Joy indicated next. Was it on that point?
Exactly that point, yes.
So, Councillor Gooch, are you actually suggesting that that is removed? And
yes,
Councillor
please.
Joy, are you, right. Councillor Blackmore?
Thank you, Madam Chairman. Just to say, I support what Councillor Mrs Gooch has said, and actually it makes an awful lot of sense, because you never know, Kent County Council may be in the process of changing their practices.
Councillor Borton, you were next, and then Councillor Perry.
Sorry, does this actually matter, this amendment, or not? I mean, it was just an example of an authority that uses 4 yearly elections. So I'm not quite sure what the point of it is. I don't think it will change the officers' work from this whatsoever, and I'll support it but it's pointless, basically.
Councillor Perry, you wanted to say?
Yes, I have no problem with the amendment at all. I agree. I only put it in actually originally for clarification. It's probably confused more than clarified. So I'm quite happy for it to be taken out and it'll be fine as is. Thank you.
Yes, Councillor Gooch.
Chairman, if I may, again, in supporting the motion as amended, I wouldn't like to tie officers' hands in any way by just looking at the potential cost savings. There could be other sorts of impacts that we haven't thought about. So provided the review is comprehensive, then that's even better as far as I'm concerned. Thank you.
Members, does anybody else want to come in at this point? We cannot, I think I'm right in saying we cannot agree this. We can suggest that this is put on the work programme for the committee next year, whatever that committee is, that it's put on the work programme for the committee next year with our firm approval that it should be accepted and a review done. I think I'm right. Yeah. Yes. We as this year's committee cannot set next year's programme. So we can make the strongest possible suggestion, but we are not in a position to insist. But I believe I'm right in saying there's been a change in legislation since the last time we actually reviewed the committee structure. So it seems appropriate that now is probably a good time to do a full review. And hopefully any new committee could do a review as wide-ranging and as thorough as the one that we'll be discussing tonight. So members, is that recommendation then agreed? So we've got to have the wording now, haven't we? That this committee recommends to the, we'll have to just say to the committee, I think, John, don't you? To the committee 2019-20, that this should be included in their work programme as a full review for the year. Yeah. Yes, is that agreed, members? Can I just... okay, thank you very much. Right, page 7, member learning and development. Mr O'Connell, are you leading us into that, please?
I will, yes.
Thank you.
Good evening, members. Hopefully be happy to hear that I'm going to be fairly brief and assume that everybody's read the papers. So the report sets out the learning development activities for 18-19 as an update for the committee. And really what I'd like to draw members' attention to are the plans for 19-20, which are set out in 1.8, 1.9 and 1.10, where we are ensuring that we are also learning and we're not standing still in supporting members. And we will also be taking into account some of the recommendations that sort of fed out of the committee structure review regarding member development 2. And we'll be taking those into account. Those are listed in the report under the heading committee structure review. And lastly, I did have a query around planning committee dates and whether or not that actually freed up as much time in the timetable to be able to do these activities. So just for clarity, including adjourned meeting dates, there are 35 planning committee dates in the 18-19 calendar, whereas there are 24 in the 19-20. So as you can see, that frees up some dates for us to be able to manage the timetable slightly better, which we'll be looking to do through Democratic Services next year. Thank you.
Yes, Councillor Gooch.
Thank you, Chairman. I have to say that once I welcome the report, obviously, because it was this committee that actually adopted the Learning and Development Charter earlier this year. What I think is so important are some of the views that came out during the review of the committee structure. There were some people that made some really valid points, and I would just like to make sure that they really are taken into account. I know our officer here, Ryan, has said that, oh yes, they will be, but I'm thinking the basics of how to get the chairman's attention, how to make an amendment, when to say that the motion be put. It's basic stuff that we know now, but are new. When you think we're coming up to May elections, we may have some new people, and I think it's important that that's taken on board. I haven't seen any sign of a member handbook, a nice, easy, I won't call it an idiot guide, but that's what I mean. That came up, and finally, bless you, a reader-friendly constitution. Now, I've deliberately brought it up under this item because it is part of what the member role is, to read and understand the constitution, and I've been fed up banging on about it for about the past year. So I would be very grateful if somebody could kindly tell me when we're going to get it. Because let's face it, it's all always going to have some tweaks because we're an active borough. And I would hope that all the changes will come out before June. In other words, during May, so that we're ready to roll with the new administrative year. Thank you, Chairman.
Okay, there are several points there. So, I mean, first of all, with regard to the basics of a committee, getting the chairman's attention, etc., I wonder whether it's worth picking up on that point with members, because members will be far more experienced of what it's like to be sat there and what works and what doesn't with the chairman. So I wonder whether we could actually involve some members in the training of other members. So maybe that's something we could talk about. With regard to the constitution, there's a fair amount of work to do on the constitution to clarify some of it and frankly tidy some of it up. We are looking to put that into our modern.gov system, which will allow it to be much more easily to make it much more easy to find what it is you're looking for within the document, and we can obviously bear in mind the audience that it's for as we're putting additional amendments, etc., into the constitution. And we were discussing just earlier today about how we have a member handbook, or how we introduce some information into the induction process for members. And obviously, if we come up with a good document that explains things clearly, we wouldn't just keep it to new members, we would share that more widely so that, you know, all members can take advantage of it.
Thank you. I will be keeping my eye on it. Thank you.
Councillor Borden.
This question isn't covered in the report in front of us, but it's just come to my mind now. And a handful of others, when we were first elected, were elected at by-elections rather than in the regular election cycle. And something I struggled with in my first few months, in hindsight, was I didn't have the member induction process that we were talking about, because I was elected in September and it was nowhere near the end of the municipal year. I just wonder, I don't think we need to make an amendment tonight, but I think it's worth sort of noting this, if we can perhaps say that where members are elected at by-elections, they get the same training, or as close as possible, that members who are elected in the regular election cycle in May. This might be in the full report that we adopted in September last year. I can't remember, to be honest with you, but my feedback from when I was first elected by election was that it was very difficult to get the training that other members would have got were they elected in the May.
Councillor Borden, I'm going back 24 years, but I absolutely agree with you, because I came in on a November by-election, and it was terrifying because you didn't get that induction in the same way. Councillor Joy, and apologies,
It's fine, it's fine. Just really, I wanted to say thank you. It does look as if that what councillors have been saying has been taken on board, because the sufficient notice, I think, was the big one for me, and I saw that that's in there, that we will be given sufficient notice, and they won't just suddenly appear on an email expecting us all, not just us, but officers as well. Yeah. So, yeah, I was pleased with that, so thank you.
Right, I have nobody else indicating. This is for noting. Is it noted, members? Thank you. So we move to item 15, which you will find on page 12. And again, Mr. O'Connell, it's for you to lead us in.
So First of all, I'd like to open with an apology to the political group spokespersons who first found out about this change, or the proposed changes, via the agenda. I find myself in the slightly awkward position of having picked this report up late in its life to know exactly what's happened before it got here. So I would like to make that apology. However, I don't think that impacts on the substantive reasons for the proposed changes within the report, namely that the report corrects some anomalies within our constitution and effectively sharpens the planning committee terms of reference, which is particularly important for a quasi-judicial committee. And following feedback that I've had since the publication, if it's okay with the committee, I'd also like to amend the terms of reference in the report on page 18 as follows. So after the paragraph that starts with provided in capital letters, everybody see that? So on page 18, in delegation of functions, after A2, there's a paragraph that starts with provided. So at the end of that paragraph, so based upon relevant planning considerations, I'd also like to add in brackets, including where there is significant public concern based on relevant planning considerations. So that's in response to some feedback that I've had since the agenda's been published. Sure. So in brackets, at the end of the paragraph that begins with the word provided in capital letters, to put including where there is significant public concern based on relevant planning considerations.
Members, there is a reason for this, because there are occasions when a planning application is raising a great deal of anxiety in certain breasts, if I could put it that way, with residents, and it is, I was going to use the word politically, but that's not the word I want really. It is in PR terms at best that it's actually heard in public. But nevertheless, everybody has to understand that while that is good for us to understand that, nevertheless it must always be on planning terms. So if you are minded to call in a planning application because you know there's huge disquiet in your, for instance, in your ward, you must still couch it in planning terms. If you can't find planning terms, then you shouldn't be doing it. So I'm personally, from the chair, I'm very happy to accept that amendment, but I can see some people looking a little bit perplexed. Councillor Gooch.
Thank you, Chairman. In supporting what you're saying, I had an example in mind where a particular site is in one parish, but the access to it is in a different parish. I'm sure we can all think of examples. So actually, the amendment, thank you very much, Ryan, is extremely important, and I'm glad to see it goes in. The other issue I wasn't quite clear about was there was somewhere that was in the original constitution about if a councillor calls an application in, a ward member calls a planning application in, he should turn up at the planning committee. And I couldn't quite see that here, but however it should go in, and at the same time it should also apply to a parish council. If a parish council calls a planning application in, they should turn up to the planning committee as well. And I thought I could find it, and I'm blowed if I can. I'm sure it's been missed out.
Mr. O'Connell, do you want to come back? I don't think you'd quite finished, had you? Anyway?
Sorry.
Yeah, so in the original delegation of functions in the Constitution as it currently stands, it states, additionally, if a councillor requests that an application is determined by committee, that councillor should attend the committee to address the planning issues they have raised. To create parity with parish councils, which is one of the things we're aiming to do through these changes, we could include that wording, but amend it so that it says, additionally, if a councillor or parish council requests that an application is determined by committee, that councillor or parish council should attend the committee to address the planning issues they have raised. it's not currently shown in the papers. We would add that wording in to what's on the papers to reflect what the statement I just gave.
Not one. Thank you very much.
Members, has anybody else got anything they wish to add? Councillor Borton.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you for the apology, Ryan. I don't know, it's fine. These things happen ultimately. We've had a chance to consider the report and that's that really. I am though scratching my head as to where this came from, because I've never once woken up in the morning and thought, right, the thing that we need to do today is to change the planning committee terms of reference to restrict the right of parish councils to call in applications. And I speak as someone who sat on the planning committee for 3 years, and I think it's a great strength of our committee that parish councils are able to call applications to the committee. And I think at times, not necessarily now, but certainly at times over the last few years, planning relations with our parishes have been very difficult. I'm sure John will testify to this. And I think having a lot of the detailed applications determined at committee has very much helped, certainly in terms of their understanding of some of the planning reasons that often necessitate a development to go ahead if they oppose it, and vice versa. So I am not convinced that this report as such is necessary. On the other hand, you've obviously got the political group spokespersons issue, and I think part of the reason that was raised in paragraph 1.6 was that independent Maidstone don't have a political group spokesperson because they don't have a seat on the planning committee. We could have just suggested that they have a political group spokesperson so that they can join that group and make sure that every group is represented in those meetings. I think that would have been an easier way to solve this particular issue. So I must be honest, I'm not sure it's necessary, and I think there will be, and because of the issues over this coming out a week ago, I think that a lot of the parishes, when they find out about this, and I don't think they've picked up on this yet, will be pretty angry if this goes through tonight. And I do think we need to be wary of that as a committee. Turning to the amendment that was suggested, if I were minded to vote for it, I would request that the amendment that Ryan wanted added at the end of the paragraph starting provided at the bottom of page 18 be changed. And the word I don't like in what was read out, so what was read out was including where there is significant public concern based on relevant planning considerations. I can think of a example in my own ward, actually, where I called an application into committee, and obviously I sat on the committee, so I was there anyway, but where the dispute between me and the case officer was whether a particular policy was irrelevant or not. And I think if we're minded to pursue that amendment, it should be based on material planning considerations, so that you don't end up in the disputes between what is relevant and what is not. What is material is much more tangible than what is relevant. So if we are to pursue this, I would request that be changed. The last and final point is, I'm very uncomfortable.
Councillor Borton, can I just stop you a minute and ask if somebody's seconding that particular point? Okay, thank you.
I wasn't necessarily moving it because I'm still unsure about the whole thing. I mean, but I think if the committee were minded to do that, that's what it should do. The other thing that I'm very uncomfortable is the discussion we've just had about saying that members and parish councils should turn up to committee. Of course they should turn up to committee, but occasionally you can't. Obviously a parish council's got councillors to choose from to represent them, but a member, I don't have a deputy ward member for Fant necessarily, and if I call something in and I happen to be away, I might not be able to turn up to that meeting whatsoever. So I think that word in there is a bit unnecessary, to be honest. I think it's sort of blind and obvious, really. But I'm less bothered about that. I think if you were to make that change with regards to changing the word relevant, I think that is absolutely essential if this is to pass.
Councillor Perry.
Yes, this is a subject dear to my heart as a parish councillor as well. I much prefer the word material, I do. So, I mean, that's really right. But I struggle with planning what's it called, planning considerations. And the reason I sat on the planning committee enough times to know that what is a planning consideration and not is often subject to a lot of debate. Now, if you're a parish council and you have your own small parish council committee, you want to put something in, you will obviously, it has to have some relevance, clearly, but I think it's another restriction. If it comes to the committee and the officers say, no, this is not a planning issue, then the committee does have the right to discuss that. And I've sat on enough committees where we have sometimes, not always, but sometimes disagree with officers on what is a relevant planning consideration. So I'm slightly nervous on that wording as well. I'm sorry, but I really am. I don't want to see restrictions on parish councils. I really don't, because they are the bedrock of our democracy, actually. And some of them are a lot older than Maidstone Borough Council, dare I say, including my own one. But that's another issue. I'm also a bit worried about this political group spokespersons, because I happen to know, this is very much a planning thing, I think, and it's where it's used, has been used, and it's been used to great effect. Actually, we've had a lot of very, very good discussions, and it does come back into the public domain because it has to come back through the planning committee, but it does give people a chance to air particular issues, and with officers as well. And most of the political spokespersons groups I have attended, I mean, it's been a joint officer group member meeting. It's just not us against them. It actually works as a team, really. So I'm quite reluctant. I really am rather reluctant. I don't quite know why this is being raised. It's never caused any problems in the past, as far as I know. And it's something that actually is pragmatic, and I realise it may upset the sensibilities of some people, but it does actually work. It's a pragmatic way of discussing issues, sometimes difficult issues, and in planning we get quite a lot of those. And it's something that actually works, and I don't like seeing it being restricted. I know maybe I'm throwing a hand grenade in the room, which I shouldn't be doing, but I do think this is quite an important committee. Thank you.
Before I call you back, Councillor Gooch, did you want to come in at that point?
At this point, there's just one particular point that I'd like to pick up on, and that's the use of the word material. So when we first drafted this, we used the word material in those material planning considerations, but the legal advice we received is that the determination of whether something is material in planning terms is done by the courts. So it's a matter that is actually taken through on a planning. So there was a lot of reticence in using that word within here, whereas we are freer, if you like, and it is broader, and we've been talking about restrictions to actually say the word planning consideration, which has a wider meaning, if you like, than something that's actually been determined as being material. You would actually be restricting it by using the word material over the wording that's in there.
Councillor Gooch, let me bring Councillor Borton back on that point then first.
On the countless planning committees I've sat on for the last 3 years, in almost every single application, if I've wanted to do something, I've been told to ask for a material reason to do it. And that is precisely why I include the word material in there, because obviously if we are told to determine an application based on material considerations or not, we should be judging whether an application gets there based on material considerations or not. So, I mean, I accept that there are legal connotations in planning for that, but I think in terms of consistency of decision making, the word material should be used.
Councillor Gooch.
Thank you. On the issue of material, if we put relevant, people could argue that it could affect the value of their houses. It's very relevant, but it's not a material planning consideration. I'll rest my case on that one. In terms of planning spokesman, I don't think there is any intention to undermine or demean or get rid of the group spokesmen, ladies, whoever, the spokespeople anyway. All this is doing, as I understand it, is to try to just bring us into line with what other councils do, so that we are seen to be transparent. And in fact, I'd go so far as to say that political spokesmen are actually they can contribute extremely valuable points at, for example, the pre-application stage. They can really contribute well without shading and without predetermining or anything like that. So yeah, not quite with you on that one, Councillor Perry.
I must call Councillor Blackmore first, and then I'll come back to you, Councillor Ball.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. I think the argument relevant versus material is quite a material one. I have a problem with the word relevant because I can just hear the head of planning saying, well, I don't think that's relevant, and the rest of us saying, well, we do think it's relevant. So I think because it's subjective, I would prefer the word material, because I think we've already established that it has a meaning, it has a definition, whereas relevant, I think, is a little bit woolly. Re the call-ins, I think the most important part of it is actually where a ward member or parish councillor can call the application in, purely because they will know more about it than the group spokesman. Because the group spokesman is covering the whole of the borough, and they will not necessarily know the individual facets and aspects of a particular ward. So, quite frankly, if the group spokesman bit is taken out, I have no desire either way. But I do think it's very important that when a ward member does call in an item, they do attend. And I think the reason we had to do that, just for a little bit of background, Councillor Borton, is because years ago, items were called to the planning committee, and whoever the person was who called it in didn't turn up. So it seemed a little bit pointless, hence there was a need to actually have a little bit of definition around that. I would actually like a little bit of clarity where it says functions relating to public rights of way. I actually thought that public rights of way were dealt with by KCC, so I don't quite understand what the functions are that are dealt with under this. It's bullet point 5 on page 18 in the left-hand column, which says functions. So if you could throw some light on that, I'd be deeply grateful.
Right, members, I think it's quite pertinent that I come in at this point, because I actually rang up and said, in the papers, it says to approve the recommendation here according to Appendix 1, and I looked at the back and I couldn't see an Appendix 1, but what I could see was that I appeared to have been sent papers on rights of way and trees. And because of that, I hadn't looked at the right-hand column, because I thought the right-hand column referred to rights of ways and trees. So I said, so confusion reigned with me until it was correctly pointed out that it's just an anomaly of, dare I say, the bad way our current constitution is laid out on the page. Because what is in the right-hand column is the general delegation, and what's on the left-hand column, well, it does apply to that, but it applies to everything else as well. And I know Mrs. Callaghan wants to come in as well shortly, but I do have some questions when we get to it tonight about how we actually use the wording, because I don't think we can approve something with an Appendix 1 if we haven't got a document that is actually headed Appendix 1. So, Councillor Blackmore, if you were confused, so was I at that point. So I will turn to, who wants to come in at this point?
Thank you, Chairman. I just want to speak about the wording issue, about the material planning considerations or relevant planning considerations. Basically, we were just talking about it here. I think the advice came from Russell about the word material. Russell is he's very absolutely straight down the line when it comes to, planning issues and definitions and things. But I don't think you should worry too much about it. If you want to put material planning considerations in, put it in, because fundamentally, if there are objections saying, this application will cause increased traffic or increased, whatever the complaints are, as long as it's not somebody saying, I don't like it, the officers are going to take it as an objection based on planning grounds. I don't think the word material is going to prevent anybody from putting forward what they want to say, and in fact, you know, Rob's not going to say, oh well, we're not going to put it forward to committee because it's not strictly a material planning consideration. So I don't think we should worry about it. I think if you want to put it in, put it in. That's my view.
Thank you very much. So we've got various amendments, and I want to try and unpick this so it's clear what we are agreeing and what we're not agreeing. But we need to come back to Councillor Blackmore's question.
On public rights of way, as a planning authority, we have separate powers under the Planning Acts relating to public rights of way than the Highways Authority do under the Highways Acts. So it's possible for us to process certain orders and things on public rights of way under those acts, which is what that relates to.
So it is purely an administrative function. Is that what we're talking about? Because you've got two things here. You've got under bullet point 2, rights of way, and then under bullet point 5, you've got functions relating to rights of way, to public rights of way. So the bit where it says rights of way, what do we do there then? If we're just doing the administrative part under the functions bit, is there duplication or is it something completely different? And if it is different, what is it?
Yeah, thank you. I suspect what's happened is it relates to, sorry to put my specs back on, it relates to the particular regulations, the function responsibilities regulations, and it probably, I don't know, I'm just guessing here, but it probably lists out these various functions, and this is probably lifted from that wording. But what I can do is simply check, and we can tidy it up. It may be that rights of way has been duplicated, but it simply relates to the role that borough councils have to do with rights of way. It may be that the wording has been lifted, and there is, in some respect, it's put in twice.
This is sort of relevant to that and sort of not. I don't know if anyone remembers last year when we looked at the Constitution, and there were certain things we were looking at relating to certain committees, and we all got a little bit upset and a little bit, our feathers were ruffled because we couldn't see where the context of something was. And I think the chairman mentioned about something else. And it's quite difficult when you're looking at something in isolation, not being able to tie it back. I wonder if it would have been easier to actually put on the front in big bold letters, please bring your copy of the Constitution with you, so we'd all have something to refer back to. Because I just feel this has been lifted in isolation, and frankly, I can't remember a lot of what's in the Constitution. I'm sure others in the room can, but sadly I can't. Well done, Mrs. Woodhouse, for bringing yours. So maybe next time when we do it, we can actually put the other bits that it relates to. Because I think when you're looking at a document every day, you can see how it relates to it. But don't forget, we're just sort of lay people who look at this once a year.
Councillor Borden, did you what you were indicating?
3 quick points, if that's okay, that might assist the discussion. The first 2 about the role of political group spokespersons, and I agree with Councillor Gooch, the intention isn't to get rid of them. Firstly, I actually think the name is a little bit misleading because the group itself isn't politically balanced. So, for example, I represent 24 members of the Conservative group on there, but of course Labour represents 23. Labour represents 3 members, so it's not politically balanced anyway, so it probably shouldn't be called that name anyway. The second point is that I've just been racking my brains, and in the 1.5 years I've been the group spokesman for our group, I can only think of one application that was called in by a political group spokesperson that wouldn't have got to committee had it not been for that intervention. It was actually in Staplehurst, which Councillor Perry will probably remember. All the others would have got there because they were called in by a ward councillor or a parish council as well. And the third thing that's unclear from page 18 is, and I confess I don't know the Constitution off the top of my head, is what was actually there before. So often we get tracked changes on these documents, but it's not, because I'm curious as to that paragraph starting provided, whether the words "in the opinion of the head of planning and development" are there at the moment. I assume they are, but I just want to double check that, if that's okay.
Let's give the officers a minute to check the constitution. Would you like to?
So it's obviously page 18 in our agendas, where the delegations of functions, under paragraph A.2, we have the paragraph that we're basically talking about, which starts provided. In the existing version of the Constitution, does it say, provided that any such representations received are in the opinion of the head of planning and development, based upon relevant planning considerations is that what's there at the moment?
No, it doesn't. It says. It doesn't. Yeah, sorry, I'm just looking through my original version that I printed off to bring, and it doesn't say that actually at all. I think that's an addition, isn't it?
Members, just bear with us for a moment. If we have to stop for 5 minutes, do you think it would be advisable? Members, yes, I'll halt the committee meeting for 5 to 10 minutes so that we can actually bottom this one out. So for anybody watching, we will just close the meeting for I'll say 10 minutes. All right, members, I'm reopening the meeting then. I don't think I've got to say that all over again, have I? So what I'm going to do first, let's try and get some things off the table. So are we all agreed that we would like that word changed to material? Can I have a show of hands? Change relevant to material. Show of hands? Yes. So that amendment is agreed. Councillor Baldwin.
Well, I was reticent to put my hand up then because I've got a broader amendment to that paragraph which addresses the issue. Fundamentally, I've just obviously looked at the existing constitution. Shall I read out what I propose the wording is, basically? So, all of this is the paragraph starting provided. So my amendment reads, provided that any such representations received are, and then you remove, in the opinion of the head of planning and development, and then you put based on material planning considerations. So the first relevant has to be changed to material 2 to make it consistent, including where there is significant public concern based on material planning considerations, which is the amendment we just passed. What I've done there basically is removed the bits where it's in the opinion of the head of planning and development, because based on the answer I've got from Ryan, that obviously material is based on law and planning is a regulatory committee, I'm uncomfortable with the word opinion in there, particularly, and the only reason I'm uncomfortable with it is because it's not in our existing constitution at the moment. So I don't think we should be adding someone's opinion when we've just made an amendment to insert wording that's got a legal connotation to it.
Officers, do you want to?
Thank you for that. Can I just speak about that? Because I think the difficulty is, if you look at the top of the column, the delegation of functions is basically to the Chief Executive stroke Head of Planning to make the decisions. So the officers have the delegation to make decisions on planning applications themselves, unless these other matters apply. So somebody has got to take the decision that those other matters apply. That's why it says in the opinion of. So the person who has the authority to refer things to the planning committee, based on all of this, is the head of planning and development. Oh, sorry.
The reason I take that, but of course, if you take it sort of paragraph at a time, the first paragraph says everything is delegated to the head of planning and development and chief executive, and what we're doing in A and the subsequent wording underneath is explaining the situations where it's not. So in terms of who makes that judgment, because material, as I said earlier, as officers said earlier, is based on legal connotations, it isn't necessary to put in the word opinion there, because a material planning consideration is defined in law, ultimately.
Yeah, but the difficulty is, yes, material is defined in law, but who is going to say that does or doesn't go to committee? Somebody's got to make that decision, and every time we can't have a legal, we can't go out to barristers or every time, shall this application go to planning committee? So it's simply for practicality's sake, otherwise the delegation sits with the officers. I don't think I'm explaining myself very well. Somebody's got to make the decision, basically. Who makes the decision that it is or isn't a material planning consideration? Yes, it is defined in law, but it's always going to be fairly subjective, because if a layman comes forward and says, this application is going to cause X, Y, and Z to my house, in layman's terms, who makes the assessment that that is a relevant material, or whatever you call it, planning consideration, that means that it should go before planning committee? Somebody has got to make that judgment, and the most appropriate person is the head of planning and development. That's what this column is setting out.
Back, Madam Chair, but I'm therefore confused about the wording in the existing constitution then, and how that applies, because when I just read it five minutes ago, it wasn't. In fact, I don't think the word head of planning and development, the opinion, that's the key word, the opinion of the head of planning and development was mentioned in the existing constitution, And by making that amendment, I was trying to bring it sort of more in line with both the advice we'd been given and the existing constitution.
Councillor Perry, do you want to come in, and then I might...
I'm really worried about this, actually. Well, the more I look at it, the more I can see there'll be a lot of protests about this. On reading, it does appear to be a restriction on parish councils, who are a statutory consultee. So when you have a meeting in a parish council and they consider a planning application, they will put their own recommendation for it to go either to committee or to delegated powers to an officer. And that's quite important. And the parish council makes that request as a statutory consultee. And I read this and I find this, I can see problems on the horizon with this goes flying around. So I think it is an added restriction, which I don't like. And I really can't support it in the way it's coming across to me at the moment. Thank you.
Do you want to come in? Because I want to suggest something, but come in first.
Okay, I'm going to put another option on the table, which is that we've obviously listened to all the comments and everything that have been made here tonight on a number of different aspects of this, and we've also been speaking about whether people have been consulted properly in bringing it here, etc. I wonder whether one of the options, subject to committee approval, would be to take this away and bring it back in another form once we've been able to look into some of the issues that have been raised here. For example, around the use of the word material and other elements. The consultation with parishes, because we're changing how we're talking to parishes. So we could do some more work on it and then bring it back with some more advice behind it.
I'm still going to say what I was going to say. I do believe that it would be a good idea to defer this, but I still think we should make some suggestions. Otherwise, we could go round and round in circles. And I want to know whether officers are suggesting that we fit in another meeting before May to bottom this out, or whether you are proposing that it goes to the next municipal year, which means that we won't get any amendments into the Constitution at the same time as we're doing all the other amendments. So that I just leave that with you to think about. What I wanted to say, and I'm asking the officers here, is if we can slightly accommodate both views, because if you actually does what Councillor Borton says, so says provide that it should be based on material view, and take out the bit at that point about in the opinion of the head of planning, a material view should be crystal clear to everybody that it is a material consideration. But if there is a dispute, then the decision should go to the head of planning and development. And that, I think sort of covers it. So if we're going to defer, you can take it away and think about that. Councillor Perry, I don't think from looking, I know I'm not a parish councillor, but I was once upon a time. I don't think this is curtailing what a parish council can do at all, because if we are saying that a ward councillor has to obey material considerations, it is crystal clear that a parish should as well. And actually, you can usually find one without any problem whatsoever. As far as coming to speak to it, as I said, common sense should apply. So I'm going to ask you, do you wish this to be deferred? Can I just have a show of hands so that we can actually see? Can I have it? Okay, right. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Those against? 1. 2 against. Now I'm going to ask the committee, because it is important that we try and get our constitution right. Are you suggesting that we should try and get this back before the end of the municipal year? Come in, Councillor Borton.
I think it would be unwise to call a special meeting over a sentence, in all honesty, and on the basis that, as Mr O'Connell said, that there wasn't a great deal of consultation before the agenda, I actually think that waiting until the next municipal year will give plenty of time for these issues to be thoroughly explored, and I don't see the purpose in calling a meeting for this. It's not like the council is going to stop functioning as a result of this amendment to the Constitution. This can be decided in June or whenever, way after I've gone.
Members, what do you think?
We've got a touch of the Brexits here. This isn't the Houses of Parliament, this is a local democracy committee. We've achieved an awful lot this year under the chairman's guiding hands. Surely we can come to some decision on this. I really believe we're making a mountain out of a molehill, and to have to leave it to the next committee because we can't make up our minds or get it right is frankly pathetic. If anything, can we not do it on sending round an email instead of having...
Right, I don't think we can do that, but I'm going to make a proposal. When we stopped the committee meeting, I explained, I hoped, what we were trying to achieve. I think that I need to repeat that in public now and get your agreement that that is what we are seeking to achieve, and then we can take it away. It's the wording we're struggling with, not the intent. And that means that the officers can go away and look for wording. And I think we could do a lot of it via email, but the acceptance and agreement of it would have to be done at a committee meeting. And so it would have to come either to an extra meeting or into the next municipal year. So I'm going to repeat what I said again. We've agreed, we have made a decision about material, so that's there. What we are seeking to achieve is parity between who can call things in, so ward councillors and parishes, not trying to stop them being able to call it in. So it's any ward that it affects and any parish that it affects that can call it in on material grounds, yes, material considerations. And so we're looking for wording that makes that crystal clear. We are, I believe, saying that we don't want to see, I think this is what I've picked up, we don't want to see the group spokespersons being removed, but we do believe that the ability that they should not have an ability that nobody else has. In other words, they can't call in any planning application they choose, because there are ways for them to actually talk to somebody if they believe it needs to be called in and get it done anyway. And again, it's got to be on legitimate grounds. And I've missed something. What's the bit I've missed that we've discussed and I haven't picked up? Oh yes, and that when you call something in, whether it's a parish or whether it is a councillor, it is expected that they will attend the committee meeting to speak to it, but if for legitimate reasons, and they do arise, that is impossible, they should speak to the officer or chairman and request that their reasons for calling it in, with the agreement of the committee, are actually read out at that committee meeting in advance of it being heard and discussed. I think that covered everything we're looking for. So I'm going to ask the committee, is that your understanding of what we are saying? So can I have a show of hands on that so that's clear as well? Thank you. And so committee, are you suggesting therefore that you wish the officers to take that away and look for suitable wording, and then we've got to work out, I think, if officers have suggestions of suitable wording, it could be sent to committee members for their opinion via email, but the actual final decision, it has to come back to whatever this committee is in the future. It's got to come back for ratification because it has to be approved and because it has to go to full council at the end of the day.
This is a very left field suggestion, but could the committee decide this by email and then whatever is agreed then just go straight to full council without coming back to a formal meeting?
Yes, it can.
So therefore, so we don't actually need to put a time limit on the deferral. In essence, it just comes back to the next appropriate full council meeting.
Members, I'm going to say if you agree with that, and I would request officers then, when they send something out by email, to please don't just give 24 hours notice, but to give a reasonable time for response, and the agreement of this committee that if they have not had responses, they don't have to chase. They will accept that we agree it. And okay, all right, members, are you happy with that? No, and I'm going to ask Mr. Nash if he's actually got all that and knows where we are. Right, we're looking for some wording here. So members, let me see. Members agree that the item on the agenda should be deferred so that the officers can find suitable wording to cover the proposals that we have agreed tonight. Does that do it? And we've got it, haven't we, on the paper? So no, all right, not deferred. Not deferred. All right, just really. We agree that the terms of reference should be amended, yes. In line with wording that officers will suggest. Arising from our deliberations. Yes, go on. We're doing it together.
Sorry. And which the committee will agree.
Yes, and which the committee will agree by email for referral then directly to full council. Yeah. Yes, I think they were there. Have you? Yes, go on then, Annabelle.
I think the reference to full council is irrelevant because anything that we decide is not binding and has to go to full council anyway. So I think you can bin that little bit because I don't think it's necessary.
But we need that because otherwise it would be expected to come back here. And what we're trying to say is that we will agree, we will attempt to agree the recommendation from the officers, but then it goes to full council without coming back to us first. That's we've got. Well, to
it didn't quite sound like.
I'm afraid I don't have a bottle of whiskey, so we can't.
So, the wording that I've captured is that the terms of reference be amended in line with wording that officers will suggest arising from the deliberations of the committee and which the committee will agree by email for referral directly to full council.
Would you read that again, please, but slightly slower? Thank you.
Yeah, certainly. So that the terms of reference be amended in line with wording that the officers will suggest arising from the deliberations of the committee and which the committee will agree by email for referral directly to full council.
Personally, I think it would read better if it said officers suggested wording rather than words suggested by officers.
Okay, so the terms of reference be amended in line with officers' suggested wording arising from the deliberations of the committee and which the committee will agree by email for referral directly to full council.
Can I have a show of hands, please, if you agree that? Oh, hang on, I need somebody to propose it. I'll propose it for.
Should it not mention that we've agreed that it can be circulated by email and then go on to full council? Because it didn't sound as if it read that way.
I think it's implicit that we read it again once more, please. No, we've got to get it right.
So that the terms of reference be amended in line with officers' suggested wording arising from the deliberations of the committee and which the committee will agree by email for referral directly to full council.
Right, which the committee will agree after reviewing on email for referral. All right, minute. Which the committee will agree after reviewing. Yes.
Via email.
Which the committee will agree after reviewing by email. For it, yeah. Just a minute.
I agree.
Terms of reference
It does read right. Yes, you're right. You're right. It looks like you're just agreeing it without
And
actually
which the
considering
committee,
it. Yeah.
which the committee will and agree.
No, it's
Yes,
right.
okay. Just let's get this changed and then we'll come back. Right, now read it out again.
We go again. So that the terms of reference be amended in line with officers' suggested wording arising from the deliberations of the committee and which the committee will review and agree by email for referral directly to full council.
No,
I'll even propose it.
right, Councillor Blackmore proposed, Councillor Gooch seconded it. Members, can I have a show of hands, please? Those in agreement? That's unanimous. Thank you. Thank you all for your patience, and for those watching, thank you for yours as well. Right, does anybody need a break at this point, or can we plough on regardless? Right. Oh, I've lost my page, that's it. All right, members, we go immediately then to item 16, which is the committee structure review, page 23 to 142, and I think, Mr. Nash, you're going to lead us into this.
Thank you, Chairman. So at its meeting on 30th of January this year, the Democracy Committee agreed the draft committee structure review report subject to amendment. Following this, the working group met for a fourth time, and during this meeting, members considered the drafted changes to the committee structure review report. In addition to this, the group discussed the response to recommendations from officers and the changes to the constitution that would be required to implement the recommendations within the report. This information can be found at appendices 1, 2 and 3. As was explained during the previous Democracy Committee meeting, the names of the committees were open to suggestion. At the working group, it was suggested that the names of the service committees are the Policy and Resources Committee, the Communities, Housing and Environment Committee, the Strategic Planning and Infrastructure Committee, and the Prosperity, Heritage and Leisure Committee. The wording also refers to a Democracy and Employment Committee in the original report, and the working group suggested that this be renamed to the Democracy and General Purposes Committee. So tonight, the committee are asked to consider the options for committee names and to provide direction on the preferred names for these. This can then be reflected in both the report and constitutional changes. Furthermore, at the working group, a query was raised by officers regarding the appropriateness of moving the cross-cutting issues and implications section in the report template. Members of the working group stated that it would be difficult to decide on the most appropriate location for this until examples had been produced. So consequently, appendices 4 and 5 show the two different options for report templates. And tonight the committee are asked to consider these options and to provide an indication as to which template it favours. Following requests from councillors, a committee structure review briefing will be arranged for members in April. An invitation will be sent out via email should this report and the constitutional changes be recommended to council this evening. Finally, an additional piece of work has arisen from the committee structure review. During consideration of the committee terms of reference, it was recognised that the arrangements relating to panels in disciplinary matters for statutory officers could be improved. This work could not be tied in with the committee structure review as it would have delayed the report. However, my colleague in legal services will just provide a brief outline of this work for your information.
Right, Mrs. Culligan.
Thank you, Chairman. I just wanted to explain something that has arisen since Mike and his team concluded this review of the committee structure. So basically, some of you might be aware that there is a particular disciplinary procedure that applies through legislation to our statutory chief officers. So that's the chief executive, our chief financial officer, and a monitoring officer if you employ the monitoring officer, which you don't at the moment because your monitoring officer is employed by Swale. But the statutory procedure applies to all three of them, and it involves, it's a bit of a convoluted explanation, which I won't try and go in huge detail, but just to sort of give you an outline of it. So basically, there are these regulations that have been in place since 2001, which say that if you're about to dismiss one of these three statutory posts, you have to take into account a review of the decision to dismiss, and the review has to be done by a designated independent person. So that was the original procedure. That procedure has all been updated from about 2015 with the updating regulations to say that now you would have to involve an independent panel, and the independent panel would be made up of 2 or more independent persons, one of whom would be your own independent person of this council, who is a lady called Barbara Varney. So it's the independent person who deals with code of conduct complaints. And then the second, or possibly third independent person on your panel would be an IP from a neighbouring authority. So I'm suggesting it would be a chap called Michael O'Higgins, who's the IP for Tunbridge Wells. So anyway, subsequent to these regulations in 2015, and please bear with me, I'm getting there, the Joint Negotiating Committee, called the JNC, who are the negotiating committee who set the terms and conditions for chief officers, so for, for the 3 statutory roles, they have come up with a model disciplinary and dismissal procedure that has been incorporated into the terms and conditions of these chief officers. So in order to reflect that procedure, we have to make some changes to our constitution. And I hesitate to say this, but we need a couple of extra committees. So one is sorry, one is an investigatory committee. It's not all doom and gloom, just bear with me. One is an investigatory committee who would have the remit to investigate any such complaint involving disciplinary procedures of these officers. Another one is an appeals panel, and the final one is an independent panel, which would be made up solely of 2 or more independent persons. So I don't think you need to worry really about the independent panel, but basically the investigatory and the appeals panel should be standing committees, and they should be independent in their own right. So they can't be subcommittees of, say, policy and resources. So I was thinking, when I looked at the structure that I think you're going to vote through, maybe we could have, I think there's a subcommittee, there's a couple of subcommittees of P&R, and I was thinking, well, maybe we could make one of those also the investigating committee, because hopefully this scenario will never arise, but we have to account for it if it does. But the guidance states that actually you need a committee that's not a subcommittee, that's sort of an independent committee that then makes its recommendations directly to council. So it can be another of your committees. So under the new structure that's proposed, we are going to have the Democracy and Employment Committee. So it could be that you decide that the investigatory committee, the Democracy and Employment Committee fulfill that role as well. But then you still need an appeals panel. So these 2 committees have to be politically balanced, and they have to fulfill all the other, the usual criteria for committee. So I thought I must mention it to you, because having I've been doing this work for Tunbridge Wells. Swale have asked me to look into it, and I realised that Maidstone, we haven't got any procedures in the Constitution that reflect the current statutory process, and we need to get it sorted. So I'm terribly sorry that I've sort of come late to the party after you've been through this whole review. It's not insurmountable. It will have to go into next year, but I need to bring forward the recommendations for what we're going to do. And in fact, I've got a report going to CLT on Tuesday just to alert CLT to these changes and that we actually need to do this work. So that's where we are.
Councillor Blackmore.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. Yeah, notice on this matter. Am I correct in saying that the investigation committee has some sort of, quasi-legal status or statutory status, i.e. we have to have it and we're almost breaking some sort of regulation at the moment because we don't have it?
Well, so the procedure where you've got to have so there's a few points in the procedure that you've got to have that are set out by the regulations, the 2015 regulations. One is that you've got to have an independent panel if you're proposing to dismiss one of these officers. And another important one is that the final decision, so following the fact that you have an independent panel review, the final decision to dismiss can only be made by full council. So that's another change as well. But the procedure involving the investigatory committee and the appeals panel is actually something set out in the model procedure suggested by the JNC and that has been incorporated into the terms and conditions. So the procedure itself is not statutory. There are parts of it that are statutory. You know, we're not breaking the law, but the worry is that if there were an issue, God forbid, involving discipline or dismissal of one of your statutory chief officers, we wouldn't be meeting the regulations because we haven't got anything set up to deal with it. And also, we might be at risk of breaching their terms of employment because these terms and conditions are incorporated into their conditions of employment, but we don't have a process in the Constitution to deal with the disciplinary process, if that makes sense. Yeah.
If my understanding is correct, and forgive me if it's not, surely the only option we've got ahead of us then is to defer this item, because how can we possibly change the structure now and then we make another change? That doesn't quite make sense. Is that what you're saying to us?
Not at all. I'm not saying that at all. All I wanted to do was to alert you. It's something that we can tag on, as it were. We may have to create another committee, but frankly, this committee will probably never meet. But we do need to, at some point, get it in the some point fairly soon, really, get it into the Constitution. But I don't want it to disrupt. You know, there's a decision to be made about whether we can actually slot it into an existing committee, and perhaps we can. And I know whether councils have done this, or whether we create an independent, a further standing investigatory committee and a small appeals panel as two separate committees, and we just slot it into the Constitution somewhere. But I don't want it to let you stop this process. I think that, that's not my intention at all.
Mrs. Culligan, we shouldn't discuss it too much because we need to do this, but you seem to be saying it could be slotted into another committee. So if you've got to have two backstops, for want of a better word, no, I don't want to use the word backstop in current but we've got, if it's agreed tonight, we've got democracy and general purposes, but we've also got an audit committee. It might be possible to have one of them set up as part of one's function, because my blood runs cold when we mention setting up another small committee, bearing in mind all the grief we've had in the last year about some of the small committees. So members, if you've taken that on board as something that needs to be done.
I can take that on board, and sorry. I realised that when I came to talk to you about it tonight that you'd be very concerned about setting up yet more committees. So I can take that away, and I'll talk to CLT about it on Tuesday, and we'll look at how we can configure it to create the least pain possible. But yeah, I just need to get it done, really.
Councillor Blackmore.
May I make a suggestion? Bearing in mind we've got audit, governance and standards, and you are talking about standards even though it's to do with officers, not with members, etc. Could you not have audit, governance, standards and the investigation and the investigation panel? And if you need something to be politically balanced, why can it not be added on to policy and resources, because that's politically balanced?
I think the issue is that we're all saying, please don't try and set up another small committee, just incorporate it appropriately. Right, Mr. Nash, did you finish? All right, members, I want to try and be disciplined about this as we have been before. can we first of all take the committee titles, and if we go through them one by one, just please indicate whether you agree. If you disagree, please have a suitable alternative suggestion. So, Mr. Nash, just take them one by one, please. First one first.
Okay, so specific.
Yes, yes. First of all, right. First of all, I suppose I ought to say, members, do you agree the proposed structure that is in your papers? Could I please have a show of hands if you do? Councillor Perry, it's the one you've been talking to for some weeks. Which page is it on? I can never remember which page it's on.
So the proposed structure in the report.
It's on page 78, but the names need to change. So, Mr. Nash, let's start at the top, please, and just take them. Yes. Do we agree the structure on page 78, which is the one that everybody who was here agreed at the last meeting? So, is that agreed? Yes, you may.
I'm sorry to ask a question, but you've got Cobtree Manor and also Queen's Own Royal West Kent Regiment on their own. I thought there was meant to be a line going to full council, so if something happened, a matter could be referred. Is there not? What? Okay, but in some of the other examples, you have got them with a line across. So I'm just trying to work out.
They are both independent, although
technically they are independent. I agree, but we have corporate representation.
It's very confusing, isn't it? But no, they sit where they are there. Councillor Borton, what is your concern? What is?
My concern is on the first vote that you mentioned. I would just that we sort of just agreed. I wasn't going to vote for it, which I think is consistent with much of what I've said over the last few months. So I don't agree to the overall thing, but if the committee's agreed it, then I'll work with what we've got.
I think this was agreed at the last meeting I accept that. This was agreed at the last meeting of the members or substitutes who were here. The process was followed, that it then went back to the working party to take on board any of the comments that had been made and sorted out. And so the final suggested governance model is the one on page 78, but we have to agree the titles that we will suggest to full council. So let me start. So the top one is still policy and resources, no change. Members, are you happy that it should still be policy and resources? Right. The next, I always think of it as chi, but what's it?
So yeah, that would remain as Communities, Housing and Environment Committee following the working group suggestion.
Councillor Borton.
Contrary to what we have on page 78, where it's the Homes, Communities and Environment Committee, does it make any difference whatsoever whether communities or homes or housing come first?
Right, Councillor Borton. When it came to the last, right, just to put you in the picture, when it came to committee last, totally spurious titles in a way were made up so that people knew they were looking at a new committee structure. But when the working group actually sat, and I must admit I'm one of them, sat down, we said, chi actually rolls off the tongue better. Why are we just, its remit hasn't changed, it's got something added to it, but its remit hasn't changed. Why throw out the baby with the bathwater? So let's keep it as Communities, Housing and Environment. So members, are you happy for that should remain that way?
Okay, so the next one along, the working group suggested that it be renamed to the Prosperity, Heritage and Leisure Committee.
Yes, Councillor Ball.
My issue with the word prosperity is that economic development as such is not always prosperous. So you look at the areas that you want to develop and regenerate, and it's actually often not the most prosperous areas of town. So as an ambition, that's good, but as a committee title, that's I don't think that's pretty bad. I think these have got to be accurate rather than saying what we actually want to do. If you give me a couple of minutes, I'm trying to think of an alternative. If you give me a couple of minutes, Madam Chair, I may have one.
We'll go on to the next one and then we'll come back.
So the next one, the working group suggested would be the Strategic Planning and Infrastructure Committee.
Members, is that agreed? And then the last one is democracy and general purposes. Is that, I'll come back in a minute. Is that on the democracy and general purpose? Oh, right, right, Councillor.
Doesn't general purposes cover democracy? Can we just call it General Purposes Committee?
No, not in quite the same way. You could say it does. There was a really strong view that the bit of Democracy Committee that is Democracy Committee should still be there in the title, and then general purposes are the add-ons. So, I'm going to just ask, members, what is your view? Do you agree that it should be democracy and general purposes, or not? Yes, do you want to come in? Yes, can I? Yes, Councillor.
Can I just check? Are we looking at? We're still looking at page 78. Okay. Right. Okay. Thank you. So this is where I'm getting confused because where is the Employment Committee going? Bearing in mind on page 78 you've got democracy and employment. Where's employment? So employment has now become general purposes.
I'll bring in Mr. Nash to explain.
So the proposed structure merges the current Democracy and Employment Committee into the Democracy and General Purposes Committee in order to streamline that, and also...
With two exceptions.
Yes, with the subcommittees, is that? Yes, so, right, so, yeah, Democracy and Employment are merged to become whatever we want to call it now in order to streamline the committees, but also it solves issues of political proportionality. The subcommittees from employment would transfer over to P&R as part of the recommended structure.
If my memory serves me correctly, there were 4 subcommittees, I think. All right, I'm going to try and explain it if I can. The debate was who should actually fulfil the function that the Employment Committee has subcommittees. And if you are on one subcommittee of the Employment Committee, you cannot sit on another one. Yes, that's all understood. But the concern was if you incorporated it with democracy and general purposes, you might not have people on that committee who have worked closely enough with the senior officers, for example. They do, that one of those subcommittees does the review of the senior officers. So after a great deal of deliberation, it was thought that it could be a subcommittee, the 2 of them, could be subcommittees on policy and resources, because the members who sit on policy and resources tend to be the lead members of the groups, tend to be reasonably experienced councillors, not entirely, but reasonably experienced councillors who have had dealings with senior officers. So, and as P&R is proportionate, then it made sense to actually move just those 2 subcommittees from employment across to P&R. The rest of the function of the Employment Committee has been moved across to whatever you choose to now call it, democracy and general purposes. Yes, Councillor Fisk.
Thank you, Madam Chair. For Councillor Borton, what about welfare? Yeah, instead of Prosperity, Welfare, Place and Heritage Committee.
Come in.
Go on then.
My suggestion, based on the it's the successor to HCL, was to call it the Economic Regeneration and Leisure Committee. Economic Regeneration and Leisure Committee, because they are basic. If you were to really drill it down, they are the two things that it does.
Members, your views?
Economic Regeneration and Leisure Committee.
Members, is that agreed by everybody or not? Could I have a show of hands then, please, if you go with, it's been proposed, it's been seconded, I'm happy to go with that, yes. That's unanimous. Okay. Right, members, I think we have names of committees to actually suggest to full council. Right, what else have we? Members, the other bit was what? Oh yes, you've got to consider the report. Please, members, you've got to consider the report templates on pages, please. (133) onwards. If I can find it myself. Yes, please.
So just to provide a summary of what the two options are, the key change is the location of the cross-cutting issues and implications section. This follows the interview process that we went through, where it was suggested that it could be moved to the front of the report. You'll also see that there are a couple of extra changes. The purpose of the report has been included underneath the executive summary. This again was something that was fed back during the interview process, just for clarity as to what the report related to, in order to help members reading. But the key issue is where the cross-cutting implications should be, either remain where they are at the moment or to move them to the front of the report.
Members, I'll just repeat that it was very interesting when we did all the interviews. Councillors in the main thought they should go to the front. Officers in the main thought they should remain at the back. So I didn't see whose hand went up. Could I just have a show of hands again? Right, I'll start with Councillor Borton and work my...
When I was interviewed, in a joint interview, one of the things that the other member and the other officer mentioned in that particular interview was precisely this, and we all had the view that the cost-encompassing implication section should come to the front, as is in the first example in front of us, because we all too often forgot to read it when we were doing our reports as well. So to me, on the basis that being at the front of the report we'll actually have to read it, that's precisely where it should be. I think I can gather why some officers would want it at the back, because I'm assuming they'll want their recommendation right up the front of the report, which is fair enough. But we have to, in my view, when you're reading the report, you've got to understand the issue, understand the risk, understand sort of what the situation is and what the conflicting views, and then at the end, make your decision. So it's perfectly sensible to have it at the front, and I personally would be very happy to go with the first option starting 133.
Councillor Blackmore, you indicate.
Thank you, Chairman. I mean, personally, I see the cross-cutting issues section a bit like an executive summary. So when you have a document, you've got the executive summary at the front, and then if you want to refer to other bits, then you can do. So for me, I think cross-cutting issues at the front is actually a really good starter for 10, because it gives you the broad outline of what we're looking at, and also sets the scene for, there could potentially be certain items that councillors might miss. So we may see the purpose of the report, but we might not think how that impacts on other aspects. So I think it does help to focus the mind. and also broaden the mind too, which is incredibly important. Because at the end of the day, every day is a school day. We all have to learn.
Who else wants to talk to this? Does anybody? Yes?
Yeah, just to say, I don't know about the last bit, but I agree with what Annabelle's saying. So yeah, I'm quite happy for it to go to the front.
Yeah. Is there any dissent anywhere to that? No. Does that give you your answer? Right, so would somebody then please propose properly? Councillor Borton and Councillor Blackmore then. Is that agreed, members? Thank you very much. I think we're there, aren't we? Yes, yes. Yeah, but that's it. Right, members, we've gone through all the detail. I now need your agreement that the constitutional changes should be made and then that it should be recommended to full council. Members, I will take a show of hands, please, on, first of all, the constitutional changes can be made. Can I see those in agreement? That is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Those against and abstentions? 1. and agreement that it should be now referred to full council for their agreement. They make the decision, we don't. So those in favour? we make the recommendation to full council make the final decision. I would like to see the hands again because I'm not sure what Councillor Borton was doing. Right, that's unanimous. Members, this is the last meeting of the year, so I'd like to thank both the members and the officers for all the hard work that's taken place this year, and I have to say I've quite enjoyed it as my swan song, so thank you all very much. And the meeting is now closed. Oh yes, Councillor Gooch.
Can I just please express to you, Fran, the committees, I hope I speak on behalf of the committee. I think we've had a pretty spanking year, actually, for the Democracy Committee. We've done quite a lot. It's obviously the change on the committee has been the big thing, but there were slightly other things. For example, do you remember the contract, the procedural? We simplified the contract procedures for a start. I think that was at the beginning of the year. But I think it's also the last time you're going to be chairman, full stop, because I know we're not going to be seeing you next year. So we wish you all the best and thank you very much for an excellent year for this committee.
I'm just, thank you. I'm just praying that Brexit doesn't drag on, so we have to... Members, the meeting is closed. Safe journey home.